Hey guys, it's Michael Whalen, and welcome to the Artist Expansion Podcast. This is episode number 17, my second interview. Yay, unbelievable, second interview, wow! So let's imagine you don't work full-time in music. Let's imagine you have a day job and you've been very successful in your life and you do music and, you play, for people, in your living room, and you've got a piano and you do stuff. But secretly, you are very serious about your writing. You have big musical influences and you work on material for years, almost a decade. And you decide at over 60 years of old that you are going to put out your first actual album. That takes real courage. That takes real commitment to do that. So I have been working with Doug Wyatt for 14 months through Artist Expansion, my artist development company. He's a wonderful client, but he is incredibly courageous because, he's a very soft-spoken guy and he's very self-effacing and he's one of these guys who's not really out there kind of like beating the drum. He just wants to kind of be behind the scenes. In this environment, you can't do that. The music is not going to speak for itself. People want to know, what's the narrative? Why should I care? He has done such a great job breaking through his own stuff and getting a successful release. The album is beautiful. It's called the Days of Gypsy Nights. Even if you don't watch the whole interview, definitely check out this record. It's really cool. The influences he has, the different things he's pulling on. It's really beautifully done. And not only did I help him create all this content, but I mixed the record. And so I have a special relationship with this music because I don't usually mix for my clients. So I really felt like I could bring something to the party, and I think it worked out pretty well. So watch this conversation with Doug. I think many of you will find yourselves in a very similar situation with Doug, and look at what he did to break through his own fear, his own trepidation, his own hesitation about releasing this music. Enjoy the conversation. So Doug, welcome to the Artist Expansion Podcast. It is awesome to have you even virtually. I am here in New York. You are somewhere in California. Welcome.
Good morning, Michael. Thanks for having me. It's fun hanging out even virtually like this.
You are a guy who has a day job and you have been successful in your life and you have done other music and you have sort of have released it. But in terms of actually releasing an album, this album really represents your first album. So what has the experience been like for you to not only get this music ready, but now that it's out the door, what's the experience been like for you?
Well, from a psychological point of view, it's very daunting, right? Because as an artist, my relationship primarily is with the music itself. I'm most comfortable when I'm behind my keyboard, when I've got my headphones on, when I'm composing. I'm happy as a pig in a barnyard when I'm in.
All right, everyone, just calm down, okay?
when I'm in the
with
studio,
so many metaphors. Oh my God!
When I'm in the studio recording music, that was the be all and end all for me, and the whole business of putting it out in front of the world. I'm kind of a soft-spoken, shy guy, as you know.
Yeah.
So the whole business of putting myself out there and communicating about the music and talking to people about it it's kind of a new thing for me.
Yeah.
Even at my age. So.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I'm really interested about is, in your mind, what makes this project successful, and is it successful by that standard?
Yeah, I think it's important artistically to not get too hung up on how well it's doing, like looking at my numbers of streams. I mean, there's two parts of it, because from an artistic point of view, it was successful as soon as it was mixed and mastered for me, because that was the culmination of the artistic vision. And I made the record that I wanted to listen to, and now I could listen to it that way. Then there's this idea of external success, and I think there's a trap there to get too hung up on it, because if you sort of decide, well, this is going nowhere and stop, you might have just stopped at that moment when you were about to get some more traction.
Yeah.
So I think there's a process. I start to see it as a daily thing that I have to do to. The music itself wants to, every time somebody gives me this feedback about the music, like, I listened to your album 20 times while I was doing my PhD dissertation. And every little bit of feedback like that reminds me that I don't know who it's going to resonate with. So all I can do is keep sort of plugging away at it.
Talk to me a little bit about filming the video, because, I'm very proud of how the video came out, but what was the experience like for you? Because you had never really done a music video before.
No, and there's the typical kind of stage fright anxiety that comes up with something like that. But it helped a lot to have you and the totally professional guys behind the cameras just taking care of all that, and all I had to think about was being able to play along with the track with the. And it was funny because I approached it almost as if I was recording it. And at some point I realized, I don't have to play this quite perfectly. and that was a big relief.
Yeah.
And, it was a sense of really being inside the music that I hadn't experienced since I'd actually recorded it. And, there was sort of this warm, fuzzy thing going on, being up there with Michael and both, hearing our own parts that we'd recorded months before again, and reacting to each other's playing. That was really nice.
And this is not a leading question. What style of music is the album? Go.
Well, people talk in terms of, when we were growing up, we had different sections of the record store.
Yeah.
And I guess I would look for this record in the jazz bins.
Yeah.
But that's one of 4 sections in the record store, maybe 5. So, and a lot of musicians sort of chafe against this, and they want to say, well, I'm a mix of this and that and the other thing, and I think that's true in my case too. But I'm starting to embrace it, because if I think about it, jazz is the music of expansion, of freedom, of inclusiveness. It's very broad. You look at someone like Keith Jarrett. He did a lot of things in a lot of different genres. I was just listening to him playing Bach the other day. And I identify with his kind of recognition that music is broader than these categories, and we just use them as a kind of verbal shorthand.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think describing anything as jazz these days can be problematic, but it's mostly problematic, at least in my experience, when you're talking to people maybe like under the age of 40, because then they start scratching their heads and they're like, okay, so what are you talking about? What do you mean, like jazz? Or they start thinking about like video game music. They start thinking about something from like Mario Kart or something. And they're like, well, that's sort of jazzy. And it's like, no, we're not talking about that. So do we live in a world where you could talk about music, your music, any music, from like either an expected or a hoped for experience rather than the genre? So for example, like with my music, everyone's like, I want to relax to your music, and I want to take a bubble bath to your music, and I want to like, hang out on the couch on a weekend to your music. Okay. So that's an expected kind of experience.
Yeah, I like to describe it more in terms of things like it's music that you can immerse yourself in.
Nice.
It'll take you on a voyage. I listened to my own record in the car the other day, and I had this experience of almost forgetting I was driving, and it felt like maybe it was a little bit dangerous. That I'd been transported. Have you ever had that feeling you're driving and suddenly you don't remember the last mile or two, and you're like, how did I get to be right here?
Oh, I've driven hundreds of miles and had that experience. So yeah, I know exactly what you mean. So I was like, hey, how did this happen? Look at that. We live in the Spotify age where people are talking about moods and they're talking about like the function of music. Okay, so when I do this, then I'll put on this as the soundtrack. Okay. And does that take away from the experience of the music? I would say no, based on what you just said about your car driving.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, people choose music that way to augment different experiences. Like a friend said, I played your music as background at my dinner party.
Okay. How was the food?
Eclectic.
This sort of bottom up, this realization at the end of the project. How did you know the record was done?
That's a good question. It just felt like I didn't have any more that I wanted to do to it.
Yeah.
I felt like I analyzed in a million different ways. I made a running order, and I made many running orders, and I look for ways to have the whole thing tell a story, even though it wasn't conceived to tell a story. There's one track that was very obviously the last one, and it became obvious which one should be first, and then everything else just kind of fell in place along the way.
Yeah. So how do you feel now that it's done with this idea that, like, here you are with your sort of ostensibly your debut album, and having people listen, evaluate, comment, criticize, celebrate, like, because I can tell you from my own experience, like, when it's just me and the music, it's protected, and it's like, it's like in a little egg. It's in a little, like, and then once it's sort of let out into the world, you really have this experience, like, sending your kid to its first day at school, and you're just like, oh boy, here we go. And what was your experience like with, having this music that you worked on for a while? It happened at a very sort of like emotional time in your life, and now you're sharing it with everybody. What was that experience like?
Yeah, I like that metaphor of sending your kid off to school, because, things happen that you have no control over.
Yeah.
And it's even worse than sending your kid to school, because it's like you've sent your kid off to New York City. And
that can't get worse than that, said the guy who lives in New York City. That was fine.
But yeah, it can be kind of anxiety provoking to, think, wow, so I've just put this out there, and, the thing that happens is there's a whole lot of people who just don't care. And, and you don't really get anywhere mentally by, focusing on that, because, there's a lot of music I hear, and I'm like, well, I don't care about that. But then, we all have these experiences of hearing new music that really grabs us, and I get just enough feedback here and there that it's grabbed somebody in some way that's encouraging and reminds me of why I bothered to put it out into the world. It's fun to make music in my living room for myself, but there's still a feeling that it's something that wants to be shared with people, that it's a form of communication.
Well, that's an interesting question, because to me, I look at this and I say, okay, well, if you don't share it, if it's just your music, does it have the same kind of relevance as if you do share it, if you do release it?
That's a good question. In terms of me listening to it and getting something out of it, I think it does. I've got, a couple of years ago, I went through all my old cassette tapes and digitized them and listened to all that. And I'm like, I don't know if anybody else is ever going to hear this, but I'm enjoying hearing it right now. I like revisiting this thing I did in 1986. So I don't really remember how I got into music, because it was just everywhere in my house when I was a kid. There was a piano, so I tell people I've been playing piano since I could reach the keys. I had this feeling that all I wanted to do was make music, and yet there was going to be some big obstacle, namely money, and being able to afford to make music. And it was right around that time, it might have been as late as when I was 20, but somewhere in that time I saw Todd Rundgren do an interview. And this was really key to me, because I'd gotten into computers. He said his advice to young musicians was to become computer programmers. And that's exactly what I did.
So Doug, the experience of working with me at Artist Expansion and getting all this stuff together. Some people know, some people don't, that I actually mix the record, which I don't do very often, for people that I work with. But in this case, I knew that I could bring something to it.
And you did.
And I tried to. Everyone just calm down.
Well, you were asking me earlier about, was there some unifying concept through the album? And I think the way you mixed it ended up being such a unifying concept.
Well, that's very kind of you. I mean, I think one of the things that I love about the record is that there is something cinematic about it. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how to describe it. It's not, I've been working for a very long time, so I don't have any of that, oh my God, it's got strings, therefore it must be soundtrack music. It's not that. It's like there's something programmatic about the music, like you're telling a story. And that very much deeply affected me. And so to me, I wanted the mix to have a sense of trying to create a character out of the piano and the strings and Michael and that great drummer and the bass player and all that stuff. And so you had these sort of musical characters out of the performance, and then you had the writing, and then you had all these different layers to it. So in a way, it's like the story you were telling, the musical story you were telling, wanted to be layered in such a way where if somebody really wanted to get into it and they wanted to discover it and sort of swim into it, they could. Now that all is said and done, what's the experience been like in terms of getting this out there? Because to me, the record only came out a few months ago, and Paul McCartney said it after he released his own record. He's like, okay, well, I guess these days you release something for 7 days and then everyone forgets about it. But what's the plan now in terms of you working the album? I hate those industry terms, but the idea of supporting the album and going out there and doing that, like where are you in this process mentally, emotionally, all that stuff?
Yeah, emotionally, I have to say I'm a bit tired right now. There's kind of a letdown that happens when you're done doing the parts that you're really good at and that you can spend 10 hours a day doing.
Yeah.
And now I'm thinking about what the next phase is. And I think that's going to involve performing live, which is a bit daunting because I've gotten feedback. One friend said, you have to have a string quartet. And that alone is a logistical big challenge, right? I've got to find the right players and rehearse them. But at the same time, I think it's something I really want to do.
I'm enormously proud of you because there's sort of two pieces to this. Number one, yes, you can say the minute the music was released, it was successful. Okay, fine. But there's another part of it that says, how are you going to support it and how willing are you going to be to support it? Because there's still a lot of people who, even though they pay lip service to this idea that you've got to go off and create a narrative for your music and you've got to do this stuff, they really don't do that.
I think you really have. I think you've really gone out of your way to support it. I think you've gone out of your way to kind of like get outside of your comfort zone, absolutely positively. But the videos are terrific, and I think they really, really showcase different aspects of the project, which I think are terrific. But more than that, I think you've gotten out of your own way.
That's an awesome way to look at it.
And because I think you could have just lied on top of this and smothered this project until it was gone, and you didn't do that. And I really acknowledge the work that you did. So nice job.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate that. And you were a big part of it with your encouragement, and you had a lot of kind things that you said along the way that really helped me a lot. I really appreciate that.
I'm here to help, with this and that. But the album's terrific. I really hope that people check it out. Checking out this podcast, checking out, with themselves if they're musicians, and saying, hey, what am I really afraid of, and what am I really dealing with? You've really done a great job in terms of managing all this. So, nice job.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it.
Thanks for talking.